it's hard to imagine on this occasion Israel would have done this without giving at least a heads up to Donald Trump.
Returning to the breaking news, though, that Israel has bombed a meeting of senior Hamas figures in Qatar. Now, it's reported they were talking about ceasefire proposals for the war in Gaza. Qatar has condemned the attack as a flagrant violation of international law. Let's talk to the Economist defence editor, Shashank Joshi, who can also tell us a little bit about what he thinks NATO may or may not do next. But let's start with the events of the afternoon. Was this expected? What do you think of it?
Afternoon. No, this was, I think, completely out of the blue. We've known that Qatar for many years, over a decade, has hosted parts of the Hamas leadership, though they came under pressure to evict them last year. Qatar has obviously also mediated between Israel and Hamas in the peace process and the dialogue process. But this is a really bold attack, quite shocking in some ways. Qatar, of course, is a very close ally of the United States. It hosts the forward headquarters of CENTCOM, Central Command, in Al Udeid Air Base. And the early reports out of Israel are that Donald Trump may have given the green light for this operation. If that's correct, this is going to go down, I think, extremely badly in Qatar, and it will provoke quite a lot of anger among other Gulf states as well.
Could it actually have happened without White House approval?
Well, yes, it could, in the sense that we know Israel does try to consult with the United States, but it also makes its own decisions and is willing to defy Washington. So, yes, it's possible it could have done. But I think given the gravity of this act and given the ongoing talks around Hamas, meetings between senior officials, I think Ron Dermer, one of Netanyahu's key ministers, his Minister for Strategic Affairs, was meeting with US officials very recently indeed. I think it's hard to imagine on this occasion Israel would have done this without giving at least a heads up to Donald Trump.
What, if anything, do you expect to hear from the new British Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper?
I think you'd expect to hear perhaps not outright condemnation, but certainly words of serious concern, because Qatar is also a close partner of the UK. It's a source of, I think it's still a source of considerable UK gas supply. Other Gulf states will be concerned, particularly other UK partners in the region like Jordan. And I think there's already grave concern over the ongoing offensive into Gaza City by the Israelis, the destruction of high rises in particular. So this will add to that sense of serious European concern. But of course, at this stage, the Israeli government, I think, doesn't particularly care about European concern anymore.
We should also say that we don't know whether this attack has been, in speech marks, successful. Are you hearing anything?
No, we're not. I mean, we know that they targeted the Hamas leadership. Some of the Israeli press accounts are saying that the meeting included Khaled Mashal. And that's really interesting because Mashal was actually the subject of another Israeli assassination attempt back in 1997. And Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, botched that attack. Two Mossad agents were arrested by the Jordanians, and Bill Clinton pressured then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as well to give the antidote to Mashal. And I think what we're seeing more broadly, if you consider this alongside the attack on Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran last year, is that Israel is deciding it will no longer give any sanctuary to any Hamas official wherever in the world they may be, irrespective of the diplomatic consequences of doing so. But for Qatar, which has now been struck by Israel, and of course, let's not forget, not long ago by Iran in that retaliatory missile attack against American bombing, I think they will feel under enormous pressure from all sides. A very, very small but wealthy Gulf state caught in the crossfire here.
Let's move on, if you don't mind, to NATO. Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, is in London today. It was 2 weeks ago, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, the meeting in Alaska between Presidents Trump and Putin, and all this talk about a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. What's happened to all that?
I think the short answer is nothing, in the sense that President Trump's desire to get a meeting between Zelensky and Putin has failed. The Kremlin has said, we're not going to do it. If you want to do it, come to Moscow, which I think would be very unwise on Zelensky's part at this stage. And so what the Europeans are doing, and that's where the action is, the Europeans are saying, look, let's show President Trump that we are not the obstacle to a ceasefire. And they are putting together this coalition of the willing, this potential air, sea and land deployment into Ukraine to secure a peace, to say, if you get a ceasefire out of the Russians, we are ready to do our part as Europeans, helped by you, America, to put a force in. But that can only happen if you put pressure on President Putin to agree. And so what's happening now is the Europeans are nudging the Americans closer to some kind of sanctions on Russia. There's a very strong European debate on this. No one is confident that Trump will move. Of course, he's consistently, whenever he's hinted at pressure on Russia, he's come back to sort of sympathy for Putin in one form or another. But that is where the diplomatic action is now, nudging the Americans in that direction.
Yes, I mean, cynics, I think, would say that the problem with the coalition of the willing is that some of the coalition are just not all that willing, or at least not all that consistent.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's been led by the UK and France, the two European powers with the most expeditionary mindset and the most comfort with using military force. The Germans are saying they won't put boots on the ground, but they will help in other ways. The Italians are very sceptical of using boots. The Poles, who are, of course, very gung-ho about Russia normally, are hesitant to do so. Other smaller countries are open. The Finns are open. The Estonians are open. But by and large, this is not going to be a big British Army of the Rhine type military force that is guarding Ukraine's borders. This is going to be, if it happens at all, a fairly modest force that will reassure by its presence, but will primarily be there to help Ukraine build up its own army. That is really where the focus is, building up Ukraine's own capacity.
Has everybody just stopped talking about peace between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, no, in the sense that the point of this is to say we are open to a ceasefire. Now the ball is in Putin's court. In a way, Russia and Europe and Ukraine are all playing to the audience of one man, Donald Trump, who says he wants peace. Of course, he wants his Nobel Peace Prize, which he's serious about. He's been calling up Jens Stoltenberg, the finance minister of Norway, to ask about this and is asking partners to push this on his behalf. So the Europeans know Trump does want some kind of peace. They're worried it will be a terrible peace, and they are trying to push him in a more constructive direction. But the reality is we are still at this stage very far from a credible ceasefire, and so the war is more likely than not to go on.
And is there anything that could come out of the state visit of Donald Trump to the UK next week?
Well, I think there's lots, not just the Ukraine stuff, and Keir Starmer and his ministers will be, and in fact, the king will be using this as an opportunity to bend his ear, to say, look, Mr. President, Putin is bombing Kiev, he's bombing government buildings, because they know that actually does resonate with Trump. For all of his bombast, I think he is somewhat moved by that killing, despite all of his pro-Putin rhetoric. But of course, there will also be a great deal of bilateral business to transact, implementing the trade deal, making sure the UK remains exempt from heightened tariff rates, working on tech policy, where I think there's a lot of tension over UK intelligence services trying to access for our various data in America. There's lots of bilateral business Keir Starmer will want to get across as well. And of course, Yvette Cooper will want to build on the work done by David Lammy dealing with J.D. Vance in cementing her own relationship with the United States, which she will have to start in some ways anew.
Yes, I mean, it was a slightly surprising friendship between J.D. Vance and David Lammy. How do you rate Yvette Cooper's chance of building some sort of friendship, a working relationship with J.D. Vance?
Well, I think it's open because, David Lammy, of course, used his own background living in America for many years to build that relationship. Also his Catholicism, a religious affinity with J.D. Vance, and that helped. For Yvette Cooper, it'll be a little bit different, of course, but she has also lived in America. I think she was a Kennedy Scholar to Harvard many years ago, so she's lived in America. She will have some of that common ground to discuss. And J.D. Vance, of course, is not the only figure who matters. Marco Rubio is absolutely critical. And I think that's another relationship that she'll have to start building up with, because he's not only Secretary of State, of course, he is also National Security Advisor, NSA. And that's a very important post these days.
Really interesting. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Shashank Joshi, who's defence editor at The Economist.